Hey y'all, it's Zegasis. It's been quite some time since I did a video of this nature, so I apologize, but life happens, and I want to honor myself in the different roles and responsibilities that I have in my life. It is the second day of August, which means spiritual new beginnings. I absolutely love the number 8. It is always a reminder for me that despite what it might look, feel, sound like, there is a new season approaching. So there's always opportunities for new seasons and new chapters. And so 8 is one of my top favorite numbers, along with 3 and 4 and some others, but 8 is one of my tops. But before I get started, let me just go ahead and say my animal kingdom is alive, well, and present in this space, which means there is a 10-pound Yorkie poo somewhere chilling. There is an 85-pound standard poodle who is lounging, and then there is the crazy 7-8-pound tuxedo cat Nephthys, who will parkour eventually. So if you see shadows or if you hear bells or little footsteps, it's because my animal kingdom decided they wanted to accompany me on this video today, and I'm okay with it. The only animal that's not here is Encanto Biggie S'mores. Encanto Biggie S'mores, and Encanto is upstairs in my bedroom. So anywho, I wanted to delve into what it means to acknowledge your feelings, what it means to sit in it. I have had a couple of videos where I've talked about the importance and the sacredness of sitting in it, sitting within self, truly, fully acknowledging your feelings, rather than what we do best, which is either repress, either suppress, pretend, trivialize, ignore, numb. We run the gamut of different things we can do in order to avoid ourselves. And especially when we're in spaces where we need to be healing. And so I found that the more I surrender, and I used to use the word surrender synonymous with like submit, and I was like, I ain't finna do none of that. But there's a beauty in daily killing your ego. There's a beauty in daily checking in with self. I have a really close friend of mine who I absolutely adore, who I go check in. And check in is our phrase to remind not only ourselves, but each other about what we're doing in that present moment. Let's check in. What does that look like? How am I feeling? What am I thinking? What am I telling myself? And so I did a class. Well, it wasn't even a class. It was more of a chat, which I'm going to turn into a class called The Illogical Eyes. And The Illogical Eyes discusses the infantile syndrome, which I created in my mind, and also the imposter syndrome. And I went through the different types of imposter syndrome, like typically the 5 people or personality traits, I guess you should say, that often combat imposter syndrome. I talked about the definition of infantile syndrome from my perspective and how they kind of interface but can connect in the same kind of way. And then, so what they are, how you combat them, and hopefully how you eradicate them. But one of the steps, one of the ABCs that we talk about is acknowledging your feelings. And so when I say acknowledging your feelings, that means acknowledging your feelings for where you are in that space, honoring yourself and your feelings in that space, and not distracting yourself. And distractions, like I mentioned in my chat the other day about the illogical eyes, is that distractions aren't just negative. They can be negative or positive. They can be healthy distractions versus unhealthy distractions. And so typically, like I mentioned, when we think about distractions, we're talking about, oh, I'm about to go to the bar, or I'm going to do drugs, or I'm going to sex it out. And sexing out is not always a bad thing. It just depends on where you are, who you with, and all that good stuff. So it's different layers to it, right? But typically when we think about negative distractions, that's what we think. But we don't think about positive distractions, right? Oh, I'm going to read this book. I'm going to go to this conference. I'm going to pick up this degree. A lot of hard work, but you know what I mean. I'm going to pick up this degree. Oh, I'm going to learn this different healing modality. So I'm going to be doing yoga, and I'm going to do Reiki, and I'm going to read this resource, and I'm going to talk about tantric massage. So you're constantly filling your time with different distractions, whether it be negative or positive. And when you are in a space where you have to sit with yourself, there is no room for distractions, both healthy or unhealthy. It's time for you to really just go within. People say, oh, I want to do shadow work, but don't know the half of what that even means. And so sitting within yourself doesn't necessarily mean that you're doing shadow work, even though that can be a proponent to it or a component to it. It's acknowledging your feelings. And so I was talking to a young lady some years ago, and she was like, you feel like you have rage in your spirit. And I was like, no. Most people who know me, they're like, oh, she's a magical unicorn. She's a Zegasis. I'm a Zegasis. And this young lady kept coming at me like, no, you have rage like under the surface. It's deep down. You hide it, but you're enraged. And I'm like, no, I'm not. Because by societal standards and by religious standards, I'm not supposed to ever be enraged. I'm not ever supposed to give into that feeling that is it seems like it's self-centered when you talk about rage or ego, right? And so I was fighting her down to the nails, like, I don't have rage. I don't know what you're talking about. But there's a beauty in acknowledging how you truly are feeling in a moment. And just because you're feeling something doesn't mean you have to act on it. And so growing up, my mother was a beautiful reminder constantly, because she constantly said it like, it's only about 10% about what happens to you and 90% of how you react to it. And it's true. And sometimes, even as a unicorn, I want to impale people on my horn, but it's not about what happens. It's about how I react to it. And so when we talk about sitting in our feelings, we really need to honor ourselves. We have to think highly enough of ourselves to give ourselves compassion and be gentle enough to be like, hey, I really need to sit with myself, sit in this, sit in it, and explore these feelings, and then identify the roots of them. If I'm enraged, what has happened? What has happened that allowed me to be in the space where I do feel this rage or I feel that bubbling? When I'm having a traumatic experience or I'm dealing with different challenges, am I imploding or exploding? And what does that look like? You know? And so when we're sitting in these emotions, there is no wrong or right. Now, there is a safety and an unsafe. So like if you're having homicidal thoughts, that's one thing. If you're having suicidal thoughts, that's one thing, right? But when we're talking about I'm sitting within myself, I'm acknowledging what I'm feeling, I'm trying to identify what the root of this feeling is, then there is no wrong or right. That's when you leave all the societal standards behind. That's when you leave all the religious and religiosity. I call it the, I'm not going to tell you the language I call it, but it's, I would get in trouble for that. I'm talking about that offline. But there's language that people use because they've been so indoctrinated that they can't just have a simplistic moment with self, or they can't even encourage people without giving the dogma that they've learned that they might not even readily apply to their own lives. And so when we're talking about our emotions and talking about sitting with self, we need to remove the societal standards. We need to remove the religious standards. We need to remove the jargon and the mottos that people just repeat. And it's this repetitious kind of BS. We need to get beyond that, and we need to really say, this is who I am, Bear. And I do this. I have activities that I tell people and I counsel people about, like being just butt naked in the mirror. And it's hard for people who haven't accepted themselves or love themselves truly. Because I've been there, right? I've been through that point where I've done a lot of self-condemnation, and I had to come back to self and be like, stop tripping. And sometimes you give gentle love and sometimes you give hardcore love, especially when it comes to self. And you have to make sure you have that proper balance. But acknowledging your feelings means there is no wrong or right. It means there is no judgment, right? There is no judgment. It means there is no condemnation. There are no feelings that you're bringing into it as far as like guilt and demeaning or trivializing. You're just honoring yourself in that sacred space, and then realizing that some of these feelings and emotions that we attributed in negative ways aren't negative at all. They're positive. Some of that trepidation or some of that cause or hesitation you might experience, some of those feelings you might be having, might be your discernment, because you're not supposed to mess with that person, or you're not supposed to go into that business with that individual, or you're not supposed to go to that particular neighborhood where you're trying to move into. Like, there are reasons that your soul and your spirit will ignite and set off alarms for you. And so I don't want us to trivialize our feelings. I don't want us to suppress our feelings. I don't want us to candy coat our feelings. You know, everything in love everything in decency and order, right? But even order is subjective. And so you kind of have to define how you're going to move, how you're going to flow, how you're going to be, not from outside of yourself, but from within yourself. So when I tell people to sit in it, I mean sit within you. Allow your spirit just to flow. Allow the breath of life, your body, to just receive your own breath, your own life, and just allow it to flow through you. And whatever you start picking up, I often say, you know, I have a million journals. Have journals, different places throughout your house. Have journals in your car. So that when you get an epiphany, when you get a revelation, you can write it down and you can refer back to it. And so when we talk about acknowledged feelings, that's exactly what we're doing, because for our sake, not anybody else, not anybody attached to us for sure, not anybody necessarily connected to us, for ourselves, we have to acknowledge our feelings and identify what it is that we're experiencing. So if it's a pattern, we don't have to repeat it. We can learn the lesson, we can understand it, so that we're not constantly going through, especially if it's in a feeling that doesn't feel good to us. If it's an emotion that is bogging us down and it's hurting our spirits, or it's assisting us in how we think, that is dimming us. So we want to make sure that as we're acknowledging our feelings, that we're in a safe space, right? And I'm talking about like physically safe space, because if you have a moment where you like wig out, you need to make sure that you're in a safe space. But you want a safe space. You want to be a bringer and holder of safety for self. Give yourself permission to be. Give yourself permission to feel. Be gentle with yourself. Be kind to yourself. Be caring with yourself. Acknowledge your feelings. Don't go down the street. Don't go grab some food. I'm going to sleep this off. Instead of feeling it, I apologize. You guys probably hear kids in the background. That's also my daughter and my niece. Tell them I was doing a video. They don't care. They living their best life. They're watching Criminal Minds without me. How dare them? That's my favorite series. But anywho, don't sleep it off. Don't eat it off. Don't distract yourself with this negative or positive, unhealthy or healthy distractions. Take time to prioritize yourself, prioritize your healing, prioritize your own needs, so that you can really sit within self, that you can really sit in it and understand where these emotions are sprouting from. That's the first step. Because you can't measure something you don't acknowledge. And I'm not talking about measuring as in like actual measurements, but measuring as in like judging, like, and not judging in a bad way, but like ascertaining what it is and what this means for me in this present season. And then what lessons do I need to learn so that I can move forward in the next season? So when we talk about acknowledging feelings, it's super, super important, whether you're talking about imposter or infantile syndrome, whether you're talking about attachments or connections, whether you're talking about just spiritual evolution, spiritual growth, what I'm going to do as far as my foundation of belief and values and standards, all that plays a part in how you treat yourself, how you acknowledge yourself, how you love on yourself, any challenges you might have with loving yourself. All that is interworking within acknowledging your feelings. So I'm going to, of course, teach a class in the future, very soon future. I'll put it out there. It's going to be on Zoom, about illogical eyes, about imposter and infantile syndrome, what they are, how we manage them, how we eradicate them. But one of the first steps is acknowledging your feelings. Acknowledging your feelings. So we're going to get into that. I've had many personal opportunities myself within the last few months to acknowledge my feelings, and it was ugly. I was very perplexed. Like, how did this happen? When did I get here? When did I jump down this Alice in Wonderland rabbit hole? I like nature. I like forest creatures, woodland creatures. I'm not trying to be one. And so being candid and compassionate with yourself, having those conversations with self will allow you to truly sit in it and acknowledge your feelings. So I'm looking forward to hopefully being a light and sharing with you all and hearing from you all and interacting so that we can push each other forward in this healing journey. So much love, so much joy, so much peace. I appreciate you taking time. It's 15 minutes, Lord Jesus alone. Thank you for taking this time to listen and hear with your spirit, your ears, and your heart. Talk to you soon. Check out the website, magicofsacredarts.org. Love you much.